This is Mrs. Bidwell, and welcome to this lecture on industrialization, the first of the industrialization lectures. Today we're going to be talking about the rise of industry. Now, as we go through this, you're going to see this graphic organizer, and if you'll please fill it out as we go throughout the lecture. The first thing we're going to talk about is the abundance of raw materials. And we spent all of our time in Chapter 13 talking about all of these resources that were found out west. And all of these resources out west are going to be very influential in the development of industry in the east. Things such as timber, coal, water, and copper and iron, all of these things are found throughout the United States, and they help fuel the rise of industry in the east. And this allows these industries to purchase these resources cheaply without having to import them from other countries. So it allows them to do so at lower cost. And like I said, it helped to fuel these growing industries. And many of these resources, as I mentioned, were found in the mountains of the West. And of course, we know that the effect of that was the dislocation of the Native Americans. You have the laying of the Transcontinental Railroad, and of course, you have the settlement of the region. And all of these minerals are going to be shipped back east on the railroad. So the abundance of raw materials makes it possible, and we're also going to look at the role that oil production played in the development of the United States as an industrial nation. Now, the very early uses of oil is not what we think of today. It was in high demand because it could be refined into kerosene that was used in lanterns and stoves. Petroleum had been around since as long as anyone can remember. Settlers found pools of it. There was evidence of oil slicks on some of the coastlines, and early settlers used them as grease for their wheels and things, but it is not going to be until after the invention of the internal combustion engine that we see this higher demand for petroleum, and it's going to become its own industry itself. The one to start this process is going to be Edwin Drake with the first oil well drilled in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859. So we have natural resources, we have oil production, and now we're also going to have the population increase. And that is going to triple from 1860 to 1910. And the whole benefit of this population increase is that it's going to provide not only a large workforce to work in all of these factories that are going to be built during the industrial age, but it's also going to provide a demand for consumer goods that are being produced in the industrial age. Not that many workers could afford to buy the goods that are being produced, but it did create a demand for all of these goods during this time period. Where did all these people come from? Really two main causes. You have large families with a stable food source. People are living longer and they're having more children. And you also have huge numbers of immigrants that are coming to the United States, particularly from Asia and Eastern Europe, as they are facing harsh economic conditions at home, and they are willing to come to the United States and to try to make a go of it here. So abundance of raw materials, oil production, population increase, and now we're going to look at the free enterprise system. So don't let me lose you here in this section. So starting off with, let's talk about one of the basics of the free enterprise system is going to be this idea of laissez-faire economic policy. And laissez-faire is this idea that the government should not interfere in the economy. Most of the time you'll hear this term referred to as hands-off, but really it's more that the government should not interfere. So keep that in mind in your definition of what laissez-faire economic policy is. The only time that supporters of laissez-faire believe that the government should get involved is to protect property rights or to maintain peace. Keep in mind, no one can make money if people are stealing your stuff or people are fighting. So it was very important that the government did establish those. So we talked about laissez-faire. Competition was very important. Competition kept prices low. Kept an even fair playing field. And another advantage of the free enterprise system were lower taxes. Lower taxes meant that companies were free to invest in other companies or to invest in the same business and refine the business. And lower taxes also meant people had more money to spend and to invest in other things. That was the same idea of government debt. The government should keep their debt low so that there was more money in circulation, so banks could loan money out to people to invest into all of these new industries that were growing at this time period. What attracted people to risk their money in all of these new industries? Profit motive. Profit motive is this idea that people of high ability and motivation are going to want to try to make a better life for themselves. And we often call these people entrepreneurs. They are the ones that take the risk with their money. They risk their capital in these new ventures. And many of these entrepreneurs came from the New England area of the United States, and many of them came from foreign investors, particularly Great Britain, because they already had established factories in Europe and in Great Britain, and so they saw a huge opportunity over here in the United States as we are experiencing that growth here. And so let's see, we talked about natural resources, oil production, population increase, free enterprise system. Now we're moving into a large free trade area. I have here a picture of the United States, and I'd already talked about how the state and federal government kept taxes and spending low so that more money was available to be invested into different businesses and industries. I also want to point out that there were no regulations on industry. So you didn't have the government saying you can't locate a factory here because you're going to pollute the water, and if you do, you have to pay us a fee. You didn't have the government saying you have to pay your workers a minimum wage, or you have to provide a safe working environment for your workers, and that's going to cost you more money. There were no such things at this time period in American history. So that encouraged a lot of investment, ironically. High tariffs were imposed on foreign goods, but not between states. According to the Constitution, it is illegal for states to impose restrictions on trade between states. And so different companies were free to trade across this entire nation, and so that's why those minerals from the West became so vital for those in the East, because there was not necessarily any added cost other than transportation. I do want to take the time to point out to you that high tariffs on foreign goods contradict the economic policy of laissez-faire, because that is government intervention. However, there were many leaders of the time period that believed that the United States needed protective tariffs to protect these new industries again from the competition of the already established factories in Europe. I also want to remind you that there were no restrictions on labor or immigration as well, so they are going to be able to provide this large workforce to work in the factories that are producing all of these goods. So, we've talked about all these things. The last thing we're going to talk about is the new inventions of the time period. Again, all of these things are working together to help the United States become an industrial nation, and these are new inventions. You have really a revolution not only in communication but in transportation, and it's going to be everybody's favorite, the invention of the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876. With that, it allows for instantaneous communication. You can control your supply line, you can coordinate orders, you can coordinate resources, and so it is really going to revolutionize the production process. You also have a transportation revolution with the railroads. The railroads allow for much quicker travel of goods and people, and with the building of the transcontinental railroads, you have basically transportation from coast to coast, and it allowed for the shipment of goods. Electricity allows for the placement of factories anywhere. Prior to the Civil War, factories had to be placed close to running water or along the fall line so that they could take advantage of that movement of water to turn turbines. Electricity is going to be what supplies the energy for those turbines, and it is also going to be the invention of the internal combustion engine that allows for the invention of the electric generator that also is going to fuel many of these factories. Thomas Edison perfected the light bulb in 1879, and we also have the establishment of electricity for New York City in the 1880s. And so it's also going to increase the standard of living, besides providing the fuel that's going to power the factories of this time period. So technology leads to more technology. As these entrepreneurs make money, they in turn look to invest in other technologies that's going to make them more money. And so you kind of see this snowball effect in all these different areas. That's not to say that not every new technology made it, but I wanted to include here a few examples of what I'm talking about. You have here the invention of the ice machine, which is the precursor to the refrigerator, and that was by Thaddeus Lowe. We talked about Gustavus Swift and his refrigerated rail car that allowed him to take advantage of the production process from cow out on the range eating the grass to the piece of meat that you buy at the butcher store that you're going to serve to your family that night. You have the Northrop automatic loom that automatically changed bobbins on huge machines that wove cloth, which allowed for these power-driven sewing machines and cloth-cutting machines that made our clothes. So no longer does it have to be necessarily made by hand. And this also revolutionized the garment industry with standardized sizes that came out of the Civil War, because the Union Army had used standardized sizes for their uniforms for the Union soldiers. And these standard sizes are going to allow for purchasing off the rack. This also revolutionized the shoe industry, and cobblers are going to completely disappear as shoes become a machine process. You have the building of the transatlantic cable, which allows for communication between the United States and Europe across the Atlantic Ocean, and the invention of the radio, which is going to create, among many different things, this shared experience by Americans as we all start sharing the same information. What people learn about on the East Coast is going to be the same thing that they learn about on the West Coast. So all of these things are going to play a role in the development of the United States as an industrial nation. Now please remember, I've asked that you record this in your charts and diagrams section of your notebook. And this is the end of the rise of industry, and I hope you have a good night. Thanks. Bye-bye.